Okay, might make a start there, folks. Thanks very much for coming to this session today. My own name is Shane Cronin, and I'm joined by my colleagues Roisin and Sarah there as well in the background who are helping out, and Jane, thanks. We're going to talk today about well, I suppose the broad term would be open education resources, but within MTU, we've leaned in more towards reusable learning resources or media-rich learning resources, particularly with our RLR initiative. But I suppose the whole point of this session is to talk about OER and OEP to give people a foundational knowledge on what it means, including things like the history of it, the licensing models, the types of activities that we've been engaged with at MTU as well, and to point you at relevant resources in terms of finding openly licensed content and to be able to adapt it and share it and so on. So I hope you enjoy this session. We're going to start, we're going to lead today, maybe just by giving you an outline. So we're going to talk about OER and OEP, and we'll maybe just have a very quick poll there. It'll be super quick just to get a sense for where people are at with the topic. We're going to talk about the whole concept of openness and specifically look then at OER and how to create OERs and talk about an initiative as well that we've been running for 2 years here at MTU, which is funded by the National Forum for the Enhancement of Teaching and Learning through the HEA, because that is our kind of local model of how to produce openly licensed content or OER content, and we also have open education practice in action there with collaboration and so on. But I'll explain that a bit further in a minute. So maybe just to lead out, what is OER and OEP? They're used quite interchangeably. Very simply, OER or open education resources are free and openly licensed resources for teaching and learning. That's just a very succinct definition for you. I mean, there are many definitions of open education resources out there, but I think that captures it well. That's actually from a colleague in UIG, Catherine Cronin, who is working with the National Forum on this resource that I'll tell you about as well in a minute. Open education practices then are the use of OER and open pedagogy and open sharing of teaching and learning practices. So OER and OEP obviously have a lot to do with each other. OEP is the practice, it's the use of open pedagogy and the sharing of teaching practices. So you'll see in the literature quite a lot of mention of collaboration within and communities of practice in the context of OEP and OER. Speaking of resources, we would have developed the following video for the National Forum for the Enhancement of Teaching and Learning as a short explainer on the whole concept of OER and OEP. So rather than me maybe harping on, I was going to share that and we'll go on to a quick poll then. So I'm just going to stop sharing a second, make sure my computer sound I have, and I'm going to share the video for you here.
Do you have a teaching and the benefits of OER include facilitating access to resources for students and educators, enabling resources to be adapted in different contexts, facilitating collaboration, helping to ensure greater diversity and equity in learning materials. Open Educational Practices, or OEP, is a broader term that includes using OER as well as open pedagogy and open sharing of teaching practices. Examples of OEP include collaborating and sharing work beyond the bounds of your class, co-creating open textbooks with students, creating OER assignments, editing or creating Wikipedia articles. Using OER and OEP can help to empower students and educators to learn from and build on the ideas of others and to contribute to public knowledge. To learn more, check out the National Forum's online resource, Using OER and OEP for Teaching and Learning.
Okay, so sorry if the audio dropped off there for a second, folks. I think I'm not sure what was happening there, but I was using my microphone anyway to pick it up for the last bit. Um, so what I'm going to do is maybe ask Sarah there, if it's okay, Sarah, just to load up a quick poll, just so that we can get a sense for where people are at in terms of your current knowledge of OER and OEP and what you'd like to get out of it in future. So Sarah is loading that up there. I think we have a URL as well, Sarah, to share. Yeah, so in
Just put the
the
URL in the chat, but you can also scan the QR code if you want as well.
Perfect. So we might move on to the first question there, which is which aspect of OER interests you most? So is it reducing costs for students and enhancing access, improving the quality and adaptability of teaching materials, promoting collaboration and knowledge sharing across institutions, or aligning teaching with sustainability and equity goals? So that refers to the SDG 4 there. So it's an even split between all of them there. Interesting. Okay. We might move on to the next one, Sarah. Very good. So what is your primary goal for attending this particular training session? So is it to discover high quality OER for your courses, to learn how to create or license OER, to find strategies for integrating OER into your teaching, or to connect with a community interested in OER and OEP? Okay, very good. So the community aspect is coming out strong there, which is interesting. Do we have and we have one more question there, I think, Sarah. Okay, what is your biggest challenge or concern regarding OER? Is it finding resources relevant to your teaching? Is it evaluating the quality and the credibility of open education resources? Is it understanding licensing and permissions, or is it having time to or support to adapt and use OER effectively? Okay, evaluating the credibility of OER, which is an interesting one, and understanding licensing. Okay, great. Thanks a million, Sarah, for that. So that was just a quick poll. Let me get my bearings back here now. Okay. Right. So openness in education, what does it mean? It's what's interesting about the OER movement is that it's largely bubbled up from and developed within the higher education sector. And as a result, there's quite a lot of research out there on the topic. The Cape Town Open Education Declaration in 2007, I think, is a good catch-all for you would speak to open education. So open education is not just limited to open education resources, not just OER. It also draws upon open technologies that facilitate reusable learning and open sharing of teaching practices that empower educators to benefit from the best ideas of their colleagues. So it may also grow to include new approaches to assessment, accreditation, and collaborative learning. So that's just to say that open education is not just about the resources. The resources are a big part of it, but you need the technology to facilitate that. So whether it's your LMS or a repository, um, flexible and open sharing practices. So a huge part of the literature is around how groups and communities of practice or colleagues across different universities share their content and reuse it and adapt it within different contexts. A really well known figure within the open education movement would be Martin Weller. And Martin presented at our OER conference actually last year in MTU in Cork. And that book as well, or that particular publication is well worth a look. The Battle for Open. Um, it is in there. In there, there's a lot of around the history of openness and open education. He talks about MOOCs and talks about the origins of the whole idea of openness. So openness here in Martin's quote is openness has a long history in higher education. Its foundations lie in one of altruism and the belief that education is a public good. It has undergone many interpretations and adaptations, moving from a model which is open entry to study, which I'll talk to you about in a minute, actually, in terms of the origins of open, as its primary focus to one that emphasizes openly available content and resources. So that's just to say that openness has moved from, open campuses, open physical locations to the whole sharing of openly licensed resources. And there's a whole community out there that support this and write about it. This is what I was just talking about, actually, the history of openness. And this comes from it's also in Martin Weller's publication, but you'll see it referenced quite a lot online. And it really talks about the early foundations of openness. So it began with an idea that it was a public good and exemplified by the establishment of open universities like the UK's Open University in 1969. And it basically removed barriers to higher education access. Then you had the digital revolution in the 2000s. And as a department, we were actually involved in an initiative at the time called the National. It originated as the National Digital Learning Resources, or repository rather, to the National Digital Learning Resources. But at that time, there was a focus on learning objects as opposed to OERs. So it was an early version of OER, but it fell on its feet after a few years because the idea of learning objects being granular and being strung together and being interoperable didn't really work in the context of open education. So that moved on later on with MIT's courseware, open courseware in 2001. And we're up here, by the way, at the moment, and the rise of Creative Commons. So Commons licensing enabled global sharing and adaptation of education resources. So there was a big struggle in this area here in the pre-2000s or early 2000s, where people were creating their own metadata to describe how learning objects looked and how they could be searchable. And that moved on. Licensing moved on, and then global expansion into what you see at the very top here. Openness became mainstream with the growth of OER, with MOOCs, massive open online courses, and government supported open education policies emphasizing access, equality, and collaboration at a global scale. Um, in terms of those global movements, governments and organizations such as UNESCO have been advocating for this for quite a while. As I say, Martin Weller emphasizes how MOOCs basically shaped the OER movement and the shift in openness to a mainstream practice. Um, for a bit of context, I've also already mentioned this. We were involved nationally back as far as the early 2000s in that National Digital Learning Resources project. And that saw a huge amount of development of openly licensed content. But unfortunately, in later years, it was disbanded, largely, I think, because of that whole idea of learning objects versus, that there was a big struggle over the granularity of content. In 2015, so not to say we weren't doing anything between 2000 and 2015, but we would have been engaged in open education practice for those years in the development of open content. But this in particular initiative was funded nationally and it was very well received actually internationally. Was the Tell Tools, or it was actually called the Tell You project. Um, that was a collection of open online microlearning courses. Very specific focus here. It was focused on teaching staff and being able to, I suppose, to upskill in the pedagogy and the technology of teaching and learning. So the project's online platform, which we developed, had over 150 openly licensed courses, and they were designed by educators and curated in a certain way. So they had pathways and all of this stuff. And then more recently, obviously, we had that OER conference that was hosted in Bishopstown campus, and that was a really great opportunity to link in with the community, and there was a lot of great workshops and presentations at that. That's just to say that I suppose we've had an engagement in this area and a real interest in this area, and in particular, I'll talk to you about the RLR initiative as well in a minute. But back to the core. Subject here, open education resources. What is an open education resource? So it's a teaching and learning material that you can freely use and reuse without charge. So the whole thing about OER and openness and the open movement is to break down barriers, to remove cost for students. And this is particularly uh, huge, really, in the United States and Canada, where the cost of textbooks is so exorbitant. And, there's a lot of focus over there in OER, particularly with regard to textbooks. But we tend to focus less on textbooks here and more on the creation of media content and assessments on rubrics and so on. Um, what is open education resources? Another one from UNESCO. This is teaching and learning and research materials that make use of appropriate tools, such as open licensing, which we'll talk to you about in a minute, to permit their free reuse, continuous improvement, and repurposing. So that idea of continuously improving to adapt the content to be able to remix it and reuse it in different contexts is really key. Now, there is a kind of a paradox there when it comes to reuse and context of use. It can be quite difficult, for example, to use a particular OER in a different context unless it's set out to do so. So learning outcomes become quite important when you're looking at the creation of an OER, and also just thinking of other contexts of use. And I think that's where the communities of practice and the collaboration across the sector works quite well. So what does it actually look like? OER material for higher education can take a variety of forms. You have the text-based stuff. So that's, if any of you are interested, go to OpenStax, for example. Peer-reviewed electronic textbooks. That's a huge platform there and where to look, and I have it in the further reading later on. But then what we've been focusing quite a lot here in MTU is subject-specific media, such as videos and images and audio. Uh, to name but a few, really, I suppose the idea there, and it can be assessment activities and material, It could be, as I mentioned, the likes of rubrics or templates. It can be interactive modules, it can be whole modules, and whole courses with complete readings and videos and lecture notes and so on. Open source software is another aspect of OER to support teaching and learning. But really, from the point of view of what is more common in what we'll do in our everyday here at MTU, we'd be looking at the media rich content, or reusable learning resources, as we call it, or also any of those kind of more granular elements that you can share within, for example, the Canvas LMS. So as I mentioned, things like rubrics and templates and so on. The OERs are either in the public domain or they're licensed in a manner. So when I say in the public domain, freely available, or they're licensed in a manner that provides everyone with free and perpetual permission to engage. And there's a 5 Rs framework that is useful in terms of speaking to how the Creative Commons licensing works. So the 5R framework goes like this: retain, sorry, it's by Wiley. The reference is there in the bottom. So retain, make, own, and control a copy of the resource. So download and keep your own copy. Revise. So this is where you adapt and modify the resource. Or like for example, you can localize it and change it into another language. Remix it. So combining it with your original or revised copy of the resource to create something new, like a mashup. I think that's a real kind of a magic moment when it comes to OER, where things can be remixed to create other original resources, and then that they get shared more widely as well. The reuse, so use your original, revise, or remix copy of the resource publicly, and then redistribute, share copies of the original, revised, or remixed resource with others. So post a copy online and give it to a friend, kind of thing. And all of this, when we're talking about it primarily here in terms of how us as educators can create openly licensed content, but a huge part of OER and OEP as well is involving students. And I think that gives students a real motivation as well. So think of it as, for example, you create an assignment. The assignment is to produce something, and the student is asked to make that content openly licensed and choose the appropriate license for doing so. That gives them a motivation because they're publicly sharing something, and they're declaring that this is an open education resource, and that gets the conversation going in the classroom as well when it comes to what OER is. How to create OER. So you can, I suppose there isn't no all-encompassing policy here at MTU for the development and release of OER, but broadly, we can give you guidelines on how to do so, and happy for if any of you want to reach out to us, we can give you guidance on licensing and on the various aspects of OER and publishing. So broadly, it should be openly licensed, technically repurposable. So that's just to, it's not something that's terribly closed down and requires specialist software to repurpose it, for example. In a very basic form, text is repurposable. Video and media can be a bit tricky, but it's possible to repurpose them. And then when you go into specialist software, so for example, 3D model or something like that, that can be a bit more closed down unless you have maybe open source software as the software that you're using to design that particular object. And it must feature an accessible design. So this is all to how one designs OER content, thinking about the future of the application of that OER and how it can be shared and used and remixed. Two relatively straightforward tasks when it comes to OER development: make it on content available under an open license, and make it available within an open space. So open spaces include our own Canvas Commons, which is available through Canvas. You can go in, if you go into the main menu, it's in there. Or you have the National Resource Hub, and you have a lot of other ones. I'll give you a few examples there in a minute. And the other, obviously, is making your content available under a particular license. And there are various license variations under Creative Commons to make that happen. Um, Licensing determines the rights of you with regards to and others with regards to how the thing is developed. So it avoids exploitation and ensures that you, the creator of the work, maintain a degree of control over how it's going to be used in the future. So very quickly, I'm going to play a little explainer video to break things up a little. So this is by my colleague, Dr. Jeremiah Spillane, and this explains better than I could anyway, explains uh, Creative Commons licensing. Don't worry, it refers to the Reusable Learning Resources initiative because it's something that we circulated to staff involved on that, but all the premise of it and the key message is the same. I'm just going to share that, and Roisin or Sarah, if you don't hear the audio again, let me know.
Some of your reusable learning resources, or RLRs, may address wide-ranging or general concepts, while others may address a specific problem that is particular to your discipline or even department. Regardless of which, what is important as it relates to a requirement of the funding for this RLR call is that all projects must produce a learning resource that is openly licensed. In this short video, I will briefly discuss open licensing and why it is important that you use an open license for your RLR project. I will also give you some suggestions as you move your project towards completion as to where you might host your resources to maximize their reusability. As part of the strategic alignment of Teaching and Learning Enhancement Funding in Higher Education, or SATL, a central requirement of this RLR funding call is to ensure that all outputs can be reused by others, further widening the pool of educational resources that are open to all. Openly licensing your educational resources is crucial for fostering collaboration and maximizing impact. By using an open license, you choose how others reuse your resource, promoting a culture of openness and knowledge exchange. So how do I license my work as open? You can make your work open and reusable using Creative Commons or CC licenses. CC licenses are the global standard for open content licensing and have been adopted internationally by open access publishers, by universities, by libraries, and more. CC licenses provide a standard for collaboration on the web. These licenses permit creators to retain copyright, but grant a specific set of permissions to others to use and/or adapt their work. CC licenses typically contain a minimal set of conditions, such as the requirement that a user provide attribution to the author. They may further specify whether you wish to allow other users to remix your content or, if you would prefer, to keep the resource intact and share it as it is. If you are unsure which license best suits you and your project, the Creative Commons provides a useful license chooser tool which helps you identify which license best suits your resource. Additionally, the National Forum provides a helpful open licensing toolkit. Where should I host my reusable learning resources? Once you have completed your project, it is important that you also make the
Okay, I might cut it off there because we've done the bit of explainer around licensing there. The sharing bit I can speak to actually in the next bit. But we're nearly there, folks. I know we can advertise this as 30 to 40 minutes roughly, so we won't keep you much longer. And please feel free to use the Q&A if you have any questions along the way as well. Okay, so that was Jeremiah really well explaining the whole licensing bit. We also have a lot more on that, by the way, and the National Forum is a really, really good resource on explaining everything to do with open education resources and open education practice on their site, and I'll link to that there in a second as well. So in terms of making content available in an open space, there are OER platforms available. In sharing content, you can share full courses, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, media, rich content, interactive activities. So for example, we use a tool called H5P here in the university. It's available as an integration in Canvas, and that allows you to create either layout or interactions. in H5P, and you can share them as individual activities that can be reused in other courses. They can be reused in courses within MTU, or they can be used within courses in other universities as well if you choose to a certain license, I guess. And there are obviously many other formats as well. The Canvas Commons I've mentioned, so that's available within the Canvas environment. So that's a very quick win and an easy way to test out publishing an open education resource within the university or to the wider Canvas community. You have the Wikipedia Commons, so a lot of you are probably familiar with Wikipedia. This Commons as well, it's Creative Commons license based, so you can get a lot of content through that. You have the OER Commons, so this is where you can search for particular open education resources and courses. You have the CC Search, which is quite similar, and then a really popular one and I'd say if you're to look at an exemplar in terms of OER, have a look at the Open University and how they've how they've created this platform, and there are a combination of courses and activities that you can use and reuse from that resource. I have to talk about some challenges because it isn't all rosy when it comes to OER. It is a movement within the education community, but it doesn't come without its challenges. And those challenges are primarily around adoption and awareness. So this framework is useful. It's a framework for Cox and from Cox and Trotter 2017. It's the OER adoption pyramid, and it just speaks to the adoption of OER at the very top, which is volition, right down to the very fundamental and basic, I suppose, requirements of computers, internet, electricity. And this is particularly important where, in more disadvantaged areas where people do actually genuinely have those issues, you can see where, as you go up the pyramid, how each section is important when it comes to providing and breaking down barriers when it comes to expensive content, but also just doing it right as well. So access to infrastructure still holds true in terms of, your LMS, your computer, your internet, your electricity. Permission is obviously key. So permission to use or create the OER. So that is determined by institutional IP policy, but also the licensing. Awareness of OER. So that is, I suppose, in terms of what we've been talking about licensing, about what an OER is, and how it differs from other educational resources. Capacity to find, use, create, or upload OER. So basically, do you have the time to do so? Which is it's a very common thing when it comes to OER is staff saying, time poor staff not having not having the time really to create the content especially significantly large pieces of content or OER, and needing the support in terms of how to use it, where to upload it, and so on. And then you have the availability of relevant OER of quality. So quality is a big thing that's discussed in the literature as well. How do you evaluate the quality of OER? And there are very useful rubrics and tools that you can use to do that. But a lot of it comes down as well to, if you're creating open education resources, how you plan for their use and their reuse, and again linking to tangible learning outcomes and so on. And volition is at the very top to adopt the OER. So those challenges, I suppose the key points or the key things discussed in the literature, again, would be access, awareness. So there's generally maybe a low knowledge of OER amongst educators, and we're hoping to make that to change that. And motivation as well is huge, obviously. So the likes of the RLR, which was mentioned in Jeremiah's presentation, are about licensing there. Those initiatives are really important to get people on board and to really make believers out of people in terms of what OER and OEP are and why they're a great thing to do. So the OER movement, this is a quote from Martin Weller again. The future of it depends on educators and institutions claiming or reclaiming its principles and embedding them into practice. That's again from the Battle of the Open in chapter 10. I'm not going to go on too much because I know we're coming up to time there, but a lot of you probably heard about our Reusable Learning Resources initiative at MTU. It's going really well, thankfully. We have had 60 applications to the initiative over 2 years, 28 projects funded, and we have a number of ongoing projects this year, and technologists across Cork and Kerry working on those projects. Guiding principles, you'll see a lot of the stuff coming down from what we've been talking about in terms of OER. So the idea of openly licensed, interoperable and modular accessibility is obviously key, scalability and pedagogical soundness as well. I'm not going to go through the resources developed. I can link you to our website for that separately as a follow-up. It was a great thing to have won actually this inaugural award for impact nationally. The Reusable Learning Resources under digital transformation. So it's just an acknowledgement from the National Forum and the HEA of their commitment to open education and open education resources. In fact, anything that's developed under the SATL funding, not only the RLR, but other initiatives such as LEPS as well and Delta, they all have to be openly licensed, and it really is a great thing to see the National Forum putting their arm to the wheel there. Some further resources in reading. I mentioned the National Forum's resource, so I'll follow up in an email with these links, but this is a really great resource to just go through understanding OER, using it, creating it, and publishing it. And then there's a lot of resources as well out of the conference that might be of use. There's a national white paper that was delivered as part of the Intutor project and authored by my colleague Dara Garrod and Tom and Dr. Rajiv Jajani, who was the keynote speaker at the OER conference. That's worth a look as well. And then, the UNESCO resources are really worth a look as well. Obviously, I pulled in a few quotes from there as well. MIT courseware is worth a look. And, there's a lot of other repositories out there, including Merlot and things like that. I'm happy to point you in the direction of anything that you're interested in there. But look, hopefully today was just a good initial session for you, just to get to create that awareness of what OER and OEP are and what we're doing at MTU, and hopefully just to plant a seed. I would say that the one thing to begin with is, if you're interested, think of sharing something that you already have created. It doesn't have to be a very large resource. Look at what it means to license that content and to publish it. Publish it maybe in our OER Commons. Tell someone about it, tell a colleague about it, see if they can, ask them to reuse it. It works particularly well, obviously, in a particular discipline. So if you're in the arts and there's something that is used across a number of modules, that makes sense that it can be reused. But I would say just start with something you've already created. And then maybe it's just starting small and working your way up to larger, more significant resources. And look, this RLR initiative will be funded again in the next academic year. So do look out for that. There'll be a call for proposals for that in the next round of things. And we'd love to speak to you. So if you have any questions, feel free to email me if you want directly after this. I don't see anything in the Q&A there so far, but look, I hope you've got something out of it, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. And we're bang on the 40 minutes as well, which is a good thing. All right, thanks a million, everybody. Talk to you soon.